Hello and welcome to Across the Balkans. Great to have you with us on the show. I'm Nafisa Latic. We start in Bulgaria, where officials say they're facing an unprecedented rise in cyber attacks from Russia. Bulgarian Foreign Minister Nikolay Milkov says they are aimed at undermining the country's democratic values and reducing its solidarity with Ukraine. Sofia is providing Kiev with humanitarian support as the war in Ukraine nears its 15th month. Since the conflict started, several nations in the Balkans, including Albania, Bosnia, Kosovo and Montenegro, have also reported cyber attacks from different countries, including Russia and Iran. But why is the Balkans prone to these types of intrusions? Let's take a closer look.
Русия използва пълен арсенал от хибридни похвати, инструментализиране на енергийните и основните хранителни доставки, кибердейности на контрол върху чувствителни технологии, безпрецедентно засилване на пропагандата.
Milkov warns that Russia has recently upped its cyber attacks on Bulgaria. By his words, they aim to undermine Bulgaria's stability and democratic values. He has also called the Russian attack on Ukraine a violation of the international legal order.
The Russian aggression, which is taking place in close proximity to the borders of Bulgaria, represents a gross violation of the international legal order and has dealt a serious blow to the existing architecture of international security, leading to significant consequences for public and political life, including in Bulgaria.
Ever since Russia launched its assault on Ukraine in February of last year, Bulgaria has provided its neighbor with humanitarian aid while taking in thousands of refugees. But that support has come at a price. Sofia says some of its government websites have come under attack.
State authorities are under possible attack by Russian hacking groups. The prosecutor's office and security services will protect the Bulgarian national interest and those of the European partners.
In October, a large-scale cyber attack blocked all access to the websites of the Interior Ministry, the Justice Ministry, and the Constitutional Court, among others. They were quickly restored, but suffered with reduced speeds.
И тук не е подложена хакерска атака институцията президентство и сайта на президентството, както се посочва в много медийни съобщения. Обект на атака е българската държава. Трябва да бъдем честни, и то българската държава като част от европейското семейство. Това, което може да направи българската прокуратура, е да си свърши работа. И аз мога да уверя български граждани, че ние ще си свършим работа, за да защитим българския национален интерес и не само българския национален, а интереса на евроатлантическите ни партньори.
The attacks were described as the DDoS type, a technique known as the handwriting of Russian hackers who flood servers with fraudulent traffic. Within a few seconds, sites become overwhelmed and crash, ultimately blocking access. Killnet, a pro-Russian hacking group, has claimed responsibility for the cyber attacks. The group, believed to have formed around March 2022 and self-described as Russian patriots, has attacked numerous government institutions and private companies worldwide. And as for the Bulgarian attacks, the group says it's punishment for the supply of weapons to Ukraine and betrayal of Russia.
Хакерската атака, която е срещу държавността и срещу не само една, а срещу множество български държавни институции, е от територията на Руската федерация. И по-конкретно от хакери, група хакери или институции, базирани в Магнитогорск, град в Руската федерация. Работата по казус е възложена както на ГДБОП, така и на ДАНС и на новосъздадения отдел киберпрестъпления в Националната следствена служба.
Bulgaria, both a NATO and EU member, has fully supported the West's response to Russia's attack, including imposing sanctions. Moscow responded by cutting gas to Bulgaria last year and demanded that future payments be made in rubles. But now, the country is even more vulnerable to Russian pressure and coercion. The country faces severe political instability, and its decision-making bodies are paralyzed. It has had 5 parliamentary elections in 2 years and is headed for a 6th without a government. And adding to that infighting is a political landscape comprising pro-Russian camps looking to reverse Bulgaria's drift towards the West. This has raised fears of even more cyber attacks to come.
To get more on Russia's intensified cyber attacks in the region and across Europe, I'm joined from Lichfield, UK, by Chris Windley. He is the CEO at Cybersecurity Association. Chris, very warm welcome to the program. And now, the officials from several countries in the Balkans blame Russia for large-scale cyber attacks. They call it a serious problem. If true, what is the main purpose of these type of attacks?
Well, I mean, with the Russians, the main purpose is always political interference and disinformation and misinformation. That's always the purpose of these attacks. I mean, obviously, some cyber attacks that they do are to attack critical national infrastructure, but ultimately, it's basically to cause friction and problems, if you like, between countries that they don't like.
Yeah, well, but how do we know if Russia is really behind these type of attacks? How can the governments be sure that it is coming from Moscow?
Well, trust me, the cybersecurity people in those countries absolutely know where it's coming from. They definitely have the technical skills to be able to say where these attacks are coming from.
Russia is repeatedly denying this. Now, Bulgaria says it's the latest victim of Russia's cyber attacks because of its humanitarian support to Ukraine. Why do you think Moscow is using these tactics across Europe, and has it been successful so far?
Well, Kaja Kallas used these phrases, which I think was somebody else, where she said, well, the Russians will always steal something that doesn't belong to them and then threaten anyone that interferes, right? So if you interfere by supporting Ukraine, the same as in the UK, if we've interfered and we're supporting Ukraine, and therefore we are the enemy. It's as simple as that.
Right. And how can Balkan countries protect their confidential data and prevent these type of attacks? This is your area of expertise. So what should the governments do, and how much does this protection actually cost?
Okay, well, cost. That's an interesting thing, right? I mean, but what I would say to you is that all countries at the minute, I mean, particularly the UK, are working hard to harden their infrastructure, if you like, and increase their defences. All countries are trying to do that. For example, going through the UK Parliament at the minute is basically a law to make managed service providers critical national infrastructure. Right? This is a massive change in the UK. So actually, one of the things that we can do is we can learn from the Russian attacks on Ukraine, right? So we basically, one of the things that I do is speak to Ukrainian people regularly, and have done over the last year or so, to understand exactly what the Russians are doing, right? And I can tell you, that from that, we've started to develop certain guidance and that for countries and for people. So there's a number, I don't know if I've got time to go into it, but I can give you a number of pointers, if you like, that have been learned from this, from the Russian attacks on Ukraine since 2014.
Now, in its latest report, the French defense firm says independent groups, civilian hackers, have emerged as a new component in the conflict. Tell us more about these hackers. How do they operate?
Well, I mean, obviously, hackers are, in it for one or other reason, right? They might just simply be in it for the money, right? or they might be in it for political gain, if you like, right? So they might be working for the Russian government, or they might be working for themselves, or both, of course, right? So you can't exactly say, you know, who they are, what they are. I mean, even you can have like lone wolf type attackers as well. There are all sorts of permutations here. And obviously there is always a strong criminal element, organized crime element, you know, which is why here in the UK, we've got our organized crime unit linked up with our cybercrime unit and then coordinating with GCHQ and NCSC.
Now, the same report says that 60% of all cyber attacks have been carried out by Russian hackers. How did they become so powerful? And are they cooperating directly with the Kremlin?
So, well, again, definitely some of them will be cooperating with the Kremlin or getting their orders from the Kremlin. You know, there's a recent article that just came out, which I could send you later, you know, whereby right now, at this moment, Russia is exercising a misinformation campaign against the Nordic countries from an office block in Moscow, right? And it's actually known which office block and which window, which office in that office block, right, the Russians are operating from, right? So that again, you know, that they can be, they can, you know, just be, you know, disaffected, if you like, hackers. They can be working on the orders of the Kremlin, or they can just simply be in it for the money.
Right. Ukrainian cyber authorities, they also say Russia is ramping up cyber attacks as of recently again. So we have this parallel cyber war that is taking place. So how do you see this playing out? Is this likely to continue? Obviously, it's increasing. And how is this playing out in the next couple of months? How do you see what's the future of this type of, let's say, warfare that's taking place?
Well, if you in Ukraine, if you go back to basically 2014, right, which is where basically when the attack started on Ukraine, you know, they have fluctuated, if you like, over time, right? But right at this minute, you know, the Russians are very frustrated, and you know, they're looking at defeat, and they will be trying everything. So I don't know the up-to-date detail, if you like, in Ukraine, but it would not surprise me to know that the cyber attacks and misinformation and disinformation attacks, if you like, have increased, right? In terms of the future, I definitely see that when the Russians get, you know, pushed out of Ukraine, and to me it's when, not if, right? When the Russians get pushed out of Ukraine, they will increase their cyber attacks and their misinformation and disinformation operations massively.
Right.
Go on.
Right, please continue.
No, I mean, basically because it'll be the only thing that they can do, right? They can't do anything kinetically, so they will do it from a cyber perspective. They will do everything that they can to achieve their political objectives from a cyber perspective.
Right. So going back at the end to the Balkans, and we are talking about countries that are not that high equipped like the UK. They don't have the know-how how to protect themselves. And obviously, we've seen, based on several examples, that this region is particularly prone and interesting to Moscow to spread their own influence. So is this the reason that maybe the Balkans is seeing these type of attacks more? And again, I mean, if the countries don't have that amount of money to protect themselves, what is their option? We can expect stronger Russian influence in that case and more disinformation coming from Russia in these countries that are, let's say, most of them an EU candidate countries or NATO members or already the EU members.
Yeah, well, do you know what? I think one of the things, obviously, about the Balkans is, you know, that we know that the Balkans has been like a source of conflict, if you like, for centuries, and that. And the Balkan countries are not actually, you know, even as prepared as Ukraine was, right? So Ukraine had certain things going for it in terms of its ability to defend against Russian attacks, right? And amongst those are that its infrastructure was basically set up to help them, if you like, defend. What I mean by that is that, for example, their power grid was split into cells just before the invasion, in fact, right? Obviously, the power is going to power the communications, right? Their communications is actually very dispersed, right? So it's a very decentralized internet infrastructure in Ukraine, right? And Ukraine was very advanced in terms of cloud infrastructure. And these countries that we're talking about here are not, right? But when you look at the Balkans, that first of all you have to try and get your head around, okay, actually which countries are in the Balkans, right? And which countries are in NATO, for example, right? And recently, just in the last couple of days, we've had Ukraine join the CCD-COE, which is the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. I can never remember that, so I have to just look at it. And so the Ukrainian experience is going into that NATO organization. If those countries are members of that organization as well, and some of them are, if they're in NATO, or if they are basically contributing partners, right, they can get advice and guidance from the rest of NATO and from Ukraine.
Right. Well, Sofia, Bulgarian authorities already asked EU and NATO to help them out to protect themselves as they are facing increasing number of the attacks as of recently. But we've seen other countries asking this before as well. But we didn't see much action coming from Brussels, which created then even more space for Russia to do this. Does this mean that the EU doesn't know how to handle Russia, even Russian independent hackers?
Well, I think you make a great point there, right? And, if there's anything that we should learn from the war on Ukraine, right, it's that you cannot allow, as the West cannot allow a vacuum to exist. Right, it cannot allow basically countries to be vulnerable. Right, it must go to their support. So if they're not doing it, then they really need to get their act together. Right, and they need to get in there, because if we don't get in there, the reality is if we don't get in there, the Russians certainly will, and probably and maybe as well the Chinese as well, and other bad actors. So we cannot, if there's one lesson to learn from this, we just cannot allow these vacuums to exist and these unsupported countries to exist.
Chris Windley, I really appreciate your insight for us here on Across the Balkans. Lovely to chat with you. I'm hoping we'll get another chance to continue this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
While Montenegro finds itself under stress from Russian cyber attacks, it's also facing pressure from the West. Following strong warnings from the EU, Montenegro has cancelled its famous Golden Passport scheme, or so-called economic citizenship program. Outgoing Prime Minister Dritan Abazovic says the country has to respect the EU's request, despite the program's benefits for Montenegro. The European Commission demanded that the government scrap the scheme, citing increasing risks of money laundering, corruption, and terrorism. The country's finance minister says cancelling the program would damage Montenegro's economy. Many believe it could also slow down the country's EU membership. The government says it will consider an alternative to the golden passports in cooperation with European partners. Mirjana Miladinovic is in Podgorica and explains how that will work.
For many investors worldwide, it seemed good while it lasted. But after some twists and turns, Montenegro has now made a final decision. It will no longer sell passports to foreign nationals over concerns this will put its EU membership bid at risk. The citizenship by investment program was introduced in 2019 by the Democratic Party of Socialists government under Milo Đukanović. It was only meant to last 2 years, but the revenues were hard to give up.
Oni su bili obavezi da investiraju u projekte koji su naprijed bili odobreni od strane vlade. Za investicije koje se nalaze na jugu Crne Gore, minimalna investicija je bila 450.000 eura, a na sjeveru Crne Gore minimalna investicija je bila 250.000 eura. Aplikanti su bili dužni da ulažu po 100.000 eura za razvoj manje razvijenih opština na sjeveru Crne Gore i u fond za inovacije također po 100.000 eura.
Officials say in the 3 years that it officially lasted, Montenegro ripped more than $320 million from the so-called Golden Passport scheme.
Ukupan broj aplikanata koji su predali aplikacije je 1113. Od tog broja neđe oko 250 aplikanata je završilo taj proces.
But Montenegrin authorities faced a fierce opponent right from the start. The EU repeatedly called on Montenegro to cancel the economic citizenship program over fears it may endorse organized crime and even the financing of terror groups.
Moram reći da je takav program već postojao u državama u Europi i da je već u momentu kada je Crna Gora uvodila jedan takav program postojala oštra kritika prema tim programima koji su sprovodili u tim državama. Dakle, već tada je postojala jedna tendencija da se takvi programi i u Europi i u svijetu ukidaju zbog opasnosti koje ti programi nose sa sobom. Dakle, to su opasnosti od korupcije, od kriminala, od upliva prljavog novca, od pranja novca i slično.
And the suspicion isn't entirely unwarranted, as was revealed during the inquest into the 2017 murder of Maltese journalist Caruana Galizia. At the time of her death, she was investigating Malta's own golden passports.
Koja je na kraju svoj život izgubila zbog toga što je dolazila do onih saznanja koji ukazuju na to da je primjena takvog programa dovela do jedne koruptivne radnje i do drugih kriminalnih radnji.
Although the program ended on December 31st of last year, the government announced that it would grant citizenship to hundreds of people in the coming months, saying their applications had been submitted before that deadline. But there are growing questions if those promises can be kept. And many applicants are still waiting to hear back.
Očekujemo da ćemo do kraja godine zaokružiti ovaj proces. Po informacijama koje ja imam, to bi trebalo da bude tako i da su oni već aplicirali u tom periodu kada je bilo prije završetka samog programa.
But despite a clear message from the European Union, Montenegro remained reluctant to give up and tried to come up with a more acceptable model instead.
Ukoliko bi se našao neki alternativni model, a o tome treba da pričamo, da zadržimo jednu vrstu ovakvog projekta, ne kroz evo, kako nam to sugerišu iz Evropske komisije, kroz prodavanje, šta god to bilo, ekonomskog državljanstva, već na neki drugi način.
And a new model was suggested. The money from the citizenships would exclusively go to paying back a $1 billion Chinese loan for the highway that's set to connect the Montenegrin inland to its Adriatic coast. But just a few days ago, that idea was put to rest. The reason, according to sources, is that the European Commission warned the government it would block the country's European integration if it were to follow the example of Malta. What's more, the European Union has also sued Malta for its golden passport model, and that's a path Montenegro seems unwilling to take. Mirjana Miladinović, TRT World, Podgorica, Montenegro.
Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. See you next time. From me and the whole team, bye-bye for now.